The thermometer reads -32 degrees Celsius. Seaman William Carter stands watch on the deck of HMS Edinburgh at 0300 hours. December 27, 1941. Ice has formed a coating 6 inches thick on every horizontal surface of the cruiser. The ship's superstructure groans under the weight. Carter's breath freezes in his beard. His gloves, doubled and supposedly waterproof, are already stiff with ice. In the darkness around him, 37 merchant ships plow through Arctic waters toward Murmansk, carrying the first of what will become 778 convoys attempting the most dangerous voyage of the Second World War. By the time the last convoy arrives in May 1945, 85 ships will lie on the ocean floor. 3,000 men will be dead, and the strategic calculus of the Eastern Front will have been fundamentally altered by decisions made in water so cold that survival time after immersion measures in minutes. The Arctic convoys began as improvisation, not strategy. On June 22, 1941, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa. 3 million men, 3,000 tanks, 7,000 artillery pieces crossed the Soviet border in the largest invasion in history. Within weeks, German forces had captured Minsk, encircled Kiev, and were driving toward Moscow and Leningrad. Soviet resistance, though fierce, seemed on the verge of collapse. Intelligence estimates gave the Red Army 6 weeks before total defeat. Winston Churchill faced a choice. Britain had spent 2 years fighting Germany alone. The Soviet Union had been, until hours earlier, effectively a German ally, supplying raw materials and oil under the Nazi-Soviet pact. Now Hitler had broken that pact, creating a de facto alliance between Britain and Stalin's regime. Churchill's response was immediate. If Hitler invaded hell, I would make at least a favorable reference to the devil in the House of Commons. Britain would support the Soviet Union. The question was how. The traditional supply route to Russia ran through the Persian Gulf to Iran, then overland to the Caucasus. This route covered 6,000 miles and required months to establish infrastructure. The northern route, from Britain or Iceland to Murmansk and Arkhangelsk, measured only 2,000 miles. But that route traversed the Barents Sea and Arctic Ocean, waters where temperatures dropped below freezing for 8 months of the year, where pack ice extended south from the polar cap, where winter darkness lasted 24 hours a day, and where German forces in occupied Norway could interdict shipping with aircraft, submarines, and surface raiders operating from bases less than 200 miles from the convoy routes. The Admiralty considered the northern route suicidal. Churchill ordered it opened anyway. The first convoy, codenamed Dervish, departed Iceland on August 21, 1941. 7 merchant ships carrying 15 Hurricane fighters, raw materials, and military supplies. The convoy reached Arkhangelsk on August 31 without loss. This success proved misleading. Dervish sailed in summer, when 24-hour daylight actually aided defensive operations, when ice remained far north, when weather, though rough, did not reach the lethal extremes of Arctic winter. The Germans, still focused on Barbarossa, had not yet organized systematic interdiction efforts. By December, everything had changed. The convoy system had expanded. Ships now sailed in large groups, designated PQ for outbound convoys to Russia and QP for return journeys. PQ-6, departing in December 1941, consisted of 8 merchant ships. PQ-7. The convoy William Carter accompanied aboard Edinburgh numbered 37 vessels. The Admiralty had committed to the route despite mounting evidence of its dangers. Those dangers became apparent on January 2, 1942, when PQ-7 encountered its first German air attack. Junkers Ju-88 bombers, operating from airfields at Bardufoss and Banak in northern Norway, attacked the convoy in waves. The merchant ship Waziristan took a direct hit. The bomb penetrated her cargo hold and detonated among crates of ammunition. The explosion broke her in half. She sank in 4 minutes. Survivors lasted less than 10 in water at -2 degrees Celsius. 6 men were rescued. 41 died. The mathematics of Arctic survival were brutally simple. Water temperature below 0 Celsius, kept liquid by salt content. Human core temperature 37 degrees. The differential killed through heat loss. At -2 degrees, unconsciousness came in 15 minutes. Death followed within 30. Exposure suits could extend survival to perhaps 45 minutes. After that, hypothermia stopped the heart regardless of rescue attempts. The convoys steamed through this environment in vessels never designed for Arctic conditions. Merchant ships, most of them American-built Liberty ships, had minimal insulation and heating systems designed for temperate waters. The Liberty ship's specifications: 441 feet long, displacement 14,245 tons, triple expansion steam engine producing 2,500 horsepower for a maximum speed of 11 knots, cargo capacity 10,000 tons, construction time 42 days from keel laying to launch. The ships were built for mass production and acceptable losses, not crew comfort or Arctic operations. Living conditions aboard were horrific. Sleeping quarters, located below the waterline for safety from bombs and torpedoes, became condensation chambers where moisture from breath and bodies froze on the steel bulkheads. Men chipped ice from the inside of their bunks each morning. Fresh water supplies froze despite insulation. Food arrived from galleys as hot meals and became cold before consumption. The toilets, exposed to outside air through ventilation, froze solid. Crews urinated into buckets kept inside heated spaces. Deck work was worse. Waves breaking over the bow flash froze on contact, building up layers of ice that added hundreds of tons to a ship's displacement. This weight raised the center of gravity, making vessels dangerously unstable. Ships could capsize from ice accumulation alone. Crew members spent hours each day with axes, steam hoses, and hammers, chipping ice from surfaces, a task made nearly impossible by temperatures that froze metal tools to ungloved hands in seconds. The escort vessels faced identical conditions while executing far more demanding tasks. A typical convoy escort consisted of 1 or 2 cruisers, 4 to 6 destroyers, 4 to 8 corvettes, and a handful of trawlers converted to minesweeping and anti-submarine duties. HMS Edinburgh, a town-class cruiser, displaced 10,550 tons, mounted 12 6-inch guns and 4 turrets, and could make 32 knots. Her crew of 750 men operated in spaces designed for Mediterranean or Atlantic operations, not Arctic warfare. The destroyers had it worst. Their smaller size, 600 to 2,000 tons depending on class, meant they rode lower in heavy seas. Waves constantly swept their decks. Ice accumulated faster. Their fuel capacity, designed for Atlantic convoy work, became critically limited when Arctic storms forced high-speed maneuvering. A destroyer burning fuel to maintain station in a gale could run her bunkers dry in 3 days, half her normal range. But the weather and cold were known hazards, predictable even if not preventable. The German forces gathering in Norway represented a threat that evolved and intensified with each convoy. The Luftwaffe established Fliegerführer Nord, an air command specifically tasked with convoy interdiction. By early 1942, this force included over 200 aircraft, Ju-88 bombers, Heinkel, He-111 torpedo bombers, and Focke-Wulf FW-200 Condor long-range reconnaissance aircraft. These units operated from all-weather airfields with heated hangars, proper maintenance facilities, and rotating crews. They could strike convoys throughout the journey from Iceland to Murmansk. The Kriegsmarine positioned U-boat flotillas at bases in Kirkenes and Narvik. The Type 7C submarine, the standard German attack boat, had a surface displacement of 769 tons, submerged displacement 871 tons, and carried 14 torpedoes. Maximum submerged speed, 7.6 knots. Range, 8,500 nautical miles at 10 knots surfaced. The Arctic presented unique challenges for submarine operations. The extreme cold affected battery performance. Ice formations created sonar anomalies that made detection more difficult. But the same conditions that tormented the U-boats also degraded Allied anti-submarine capabilities. Sonar, or ASDIC as the British called it, functioned poorly in Arctic waters where temperature gradients and ice scattered sound waves unpredictably. The most dangerous threat came from surface raiders. The German Navy stationed heavy units in Norwegian fjords specifically to attack the convoys. The pocket battleship Admiral Scheer, displacement 12,100 tons, 6 11-inch guns, 26-knot maximum speed. The heavy cruiser Admiral Hipper, displacement 14,000 tons, 8 8-inch guns, 32 knots, and most dangerous of all, Tirpitz. Tirpitz was the second of the Bismarck-class battleships. Displacement 42,900 tons fully loaded. 8 15-inch guns and 4 turrets, each capable of firing a 1,700-pound shell 22 miles. Secondary armament of 12 5.9-inch guns, 16 4.1-inch guns, and dozens of anti-aircraft weapons. Maximum speed 30.5 knots. Armor belt 12.6 inches thick. She was the most powerful warship in European waters, and her mere presence in Norwegian fjords forced the Royal Navy to maintain heavy units with every convoy, tying down battleships and carriers that were desperately needed elsewhere. The British considered attacking Tirpitz in port. On January 24, 1942, RAF Bomber Command dispatched 7 Avro Lancaster bombers to attack her anchorage at Fetten Fjord. The raid failed. The Lancasters, flying at the limit of their range, could not penetrate the torpedo nets and anti-aircraft defenses. Tirpitz remained operational, a threat that shaped Allied planning for the next 2 years. Convoy PQ-12 departed Reykjavik on March 1, 1942. 16 merchant ships carrying ammunition, tanks, and aircraft to Murmansk. The covering force included the battleship HMS Duke of York, the battlecruiser HMS Renown, the aircraft carrier HMS Victorious, and a screen of 12 destroyers. Admiral John Tovey commanded from Duke of York. His orders were straightforward: protect the convoy and, if possible, engage and destroy Tirpitz. German intelligence detected PQ-12 shortly after departure. Grand Admiral Erich Raeder ordered Tirpitz to sea. The battleship, accompanied by 3 destroyers, sortied from Trondheim on March 6th. Her mission: find and destroy the convoy before British heavy units could intervene. For 3 days, the two forces maneuvered in Arctic darkness and weather that reduced visibility to hundreds of meters. Tirpitz's search aircraft located the convoy on March 7th. Tirpitz increased speed to intercept, but British radio intercepts had revealed Tirpitz's sortie. Tovey positioned his task force between the German battleship and the convoy, attempting to force an engagement. On March 8th, a reconnaissance aircraft from Victorious spotted Tirpitz at a distance of 80 miles. Tovey launched an airstrike. 12 Fairey Albacore torpedo bombers escorted by 6 Fairey Fulmar fighters. The Albacores were obsolete, fabric-covered biplanes with a maximum speed of 161 miles per hour. They carried a single 18-inch torpedo with a 470-pound warhead. Against Tirpitz's armor, these weapons were marginally effective at best. The strike reached Tirpitz at 1500 hours. The battleship maneuvered violently, her anti-aircraft guns throwing up a wall of fire. Every torpedo missed. The Albacores withdrew. Tirpitz, aware that British heavy units were close and that her position was now known, reversed course and returned to Trondheim. The convoy reached Murmansk on March 12th without loss. PQ-12 had succeeded, but the engagement demonstrated the fundamental problem facing the Arctic convoys. The Germans could choose when and how to engage. British forces, tied to protecting slow merchant ships, had to react to German initiatives. This asymmetry favored the attacker, and as German forces in Norway strengthened, the imbalance worsened. Convoy PQ-13, departing March 21st, lost 5 ships to submarines and aircraft. PQ-14 lost 1 to a U-boat. PQ-15 arrived intact, but only because ice forced the convoy far north, beyond the range of German bombers. The window for success was closing. As spring arrived and the ice receded, convoys would have to transit waters within easy reach of German air and naval bases. PQ-16 departed Iceland on May 21st, 1942. 35 merchant ships, carrying over 200 tanks, 300 aircraft, and thousands of tons of ammunition and supplies. The escort included the cruiser HMS Nigeria and 4 American destroyers. The United States having entered the war 5 months earlier, this convoy would mark a turning point in the Arctic campaign. German forces detected PQ-16 on May 25th. Over the next 5 days, the convoy faced continuous attack. U-boat wolf packs stalked the merchant ships. Torpedo bombers struck in waves of 20 to 30 aircraft. The escorts fought desperately, their anti-aircraft ammunition running low, their fuel reserves depleting. 7 merchant ships were sunk, 140 tanks, 77 aircraft, and 351 trucks went to the bottom. 207 men died. The survivors reached Murmansk on May 30th. Soviet reception was perfunctory. Dock workers unloaded cargoes with minimal care. British and American seamen, exhausted and traumatized, received no recognition of what they had endured. The disconnect between sacrifice and gratitude began to fray morale. Churchill and his advisors reviewed the mounting losses. The arithmetic was unsustainable. Since the convoys began, 22 merchant ships had been sunk out of 207 dispatched, a loss rate of 10%. Aircraft and submarine losses among the escorts were also mounting. The summer convoys, when 24-hour daylight would give German aircraft unlimited operating time, promised worse casualties. The decision was made to send one more convoy before suspending operations until the return of winter darkness. That convoy was PQ-17. PQ-17 assembled in Hvalfjord, Iceland, in late June. 36 merchant ships from 6 nations, American, British, Soviet, Dutch, and Panamanian flags. Total cargo, 297 aircraft, 594 tanks, 4,246 vehicles, and 156,000 tons of general cargo. The convoy represented 1/10 of Soviet tank production for the entire year. Its loss would be a strategic catastrophe. The escort under Commander Jack Broom consisted of 6 destroyers, 4 corvettes, 3 minesweepers, 4 armed trawlers, and 2 anti-aircraft ships. The covering force under Rear Admiral Lewis Hamilton included 4 cruisers, HMS Norfolk, HMS London, HMS Nigeria, and the American USS Tuscaloosa. Further west, Admiral Tovey commanded the distant covering force, the battleships HMS Duke of York and USS Washington, the carrier HMS Victorious, 2 cruisers, and 14 destroyers. The German response was unprecedented. Raeder ordered every available asset to attack PQ-17. Tirpitz, now accompanied by the pocket battleship Lutzow, the heavy cruiser Admiral Hipper, and 7 destroyers, moved to forward anchorages in Altenfjord. The Luftwaffe assembled over 260 aircraft. 30 U-boats formed patrol lines across the convoy's projected route. PQ-17 departed Hvalfjord on June 27th. For the first 4 days, the voyage proceeded without incident. The convoy maintained formation, ships spaced at intervals of 5 cables, roughly 1,000 yards. Speed of advance, 8 knots, limited by the slowest vessel. On July 1st, the first U-boat contact was detected. Depth charges drove off the attacker. On July 2nd, German reconnaissance aircraft began shadowing the convoy, circling beyond anti-aircraft range, reporting position and course every 2 hours. The first air attack came at 1400 hours on July 4th. 25 Heinkel. He-111 torpedo bombers approached from the south. The escorts laid smoke, attempting to obscure the merchant ships. The anti-aircraft ships HMS Poza Rica and HMS Palomares opened fire with their 3-inch and 4-inch guns. Tracer rounds arced across the sky. The Germans pressed their attacks through the barrage. The first torpedo struck the freighter Christopher Newport amidships. The second hit the Soviet tanker Azerbaijan. Both ships began listing. The convoy maneuvered, individual ships turning to avoid torpedoes. Formation discipline broke down. By 1700 hours, 3 ships had been sunk and the convoy was scattered over 20 square miles of ocean. Hamilton's cruisers, steaming northeast of the convoy, detected reports of German surface units sortying from Altenfjord. Tirpitz had sailed. Hamilton faced an impossible situation. His cruisers could not fight a battleship. If Tirpitz reached the convoy, she would massacre the merchant ships. Hamilton needed Tovey's battleships, but they were 300 miles west, 12 hours away at maximum speed. At 2100 hours on July 4th, the Admiralty in London received confirmation. Tirpitz, accompanied by heavy cruisers and destroyers, was at sea and heading toward PQ-17. First Sea Lord Admiral Dudley Pound made a decision that would become one of the most controversial in Royal Navy history. He ordered the convoy to scatter. The signal went out at 21:23 hours. Owing to threat from surface ships, convoy is to disperse and proceed to Russian ports. 11 minutes later, a second signal. Convoy is to scatter. Commander Broom, aboard the destroyer HMS Keppel, could not believe what he was reading. Scattering meant abandoning formation, breaking up the concentrated anti-aircraft defense, sending individual merchant ships to find their own way to Murmansk across 700 miles of ocean infested with U-boats and aircraft. It was a death sentence, but orders were orders. Broom signaled the merchant ships. Scatter fanwise. Proceed independently to destination. The convoy dissolved. 36 ships turned onto divergent courses, their captains suddenly alone. Their only protection a handful of anti-aircraft guns manned by merchant seamen. Hamilton's cruiser force, no longer needed to protect a concentrated convoy, withdrew westward. The close escort destroyers, critically low on fuel and ammunition, withdrew as well. By midnight on July 4th, The merchant ships of PQ-17 were scattered across hundreds of square miles of Arctic Ocean with no escort, no protection, and no hope of mutual support. The slaughter began at dawn on July 5th. German reconnaissance aircraft located isolated merchant ships throughout the morning. U-boats received position reports and closed for attack. The Luftwaffe launched coordinated strikes. Merchant ships, steaming alone at 8 knots, could not maneuver effectively. They could not concentrate defensive fire. They could not protect each other. The American freighter Carleton was sunk by bombs at 0800 hours. The British freighter Earlston by torpedoes at 0930. The Dutch freighter Paulus Potter at 1100 hours. River Afton at 1300. Washington at 1430. Bolton Castle at 1600. The attacks continued through the day and night. Ships burned. Lifeboats launched into Arctic waters. Men died in explosions, by drowning, by freezing. July 6th brought more attacks. Pandkraft sunk. Hoosier. Olopana. Fairfield City. The Germans were hunting methodically, searching each sector, attacking every ship detected. Some merchant captains attempted to hide in fog banks or among ice floes. Others steamed at maximum speed toward Novaya Zemlya, hoping to reach Soviet territorial waters before being caught. A few fought back with their deck guns. Futile gestures against bombers and submarines, but psychologically necessary. The massacre continued for 6 days. When it ended, 24 merchant ships had been sunk, 430 aircraft, 210 tanks, 3,350 vehicles, and 99,000 tons of cargo lost. 153 merchant seamen killed. The largest Arctic convoy disaster of the war, and Tirpitz never came close to the convoy. German Naval Command, learning that British battleships were at sea, had recalled the surface force before it could engage. The decision to scatter had been based on a threat that never materialized. The recriminations were immediate and savage. Broome criticized Pound's decision publicly. Survivors described the horror of abandonment. The merchant marine community, already skeptical of Royal Navy competence after earlier disasters, became openly mutinous. Some captains refused to sail on future Arctic convoys. The United States Navy questioned whether British command was capable of protecting Allied shipping. Pound defended his decision. He had intelligence that Tirpitz was at sea. He knew Hamilton's cruisers could not fight a battleship. He believed scattering gave individual ships a better chance of survival than concentration if Tirpitz reached the convoy. The mathematics supported his reasoning. A battleship could systematically destroy a concentrated convoy, but could not pursue scattered ships across hundreds of miles of ocean. But Pound's decision ignored 2 critical factors. First, German air and submarine forces could hunt scattered ships far more effectively than they could attack a concentrated, defended convoy. Second, the psychological impact of abandonment destroyed morale across the merchant marine. Ships could be replaced. Cargo could be reloaded. Trust, once broken, could not be repaired. The Arctic convoys were suspended. Churchill personally informed Stalin that no more convoys would sail until the return of winter darkness. Stalin's response was cold fury. The Soviet Union was fighting for survival. Over 3 million Soviet soldiers had been killed, wounded, or captured in the first year of war. German forces were driving toward the Caucasus oil fields. Every tank, every aircraft, every ton of supplies mattered. The suspension of convoys was, in Stalin's view, a betrayal. The next convoy, PQ-18, did not sail until September 13th. Over 2 months later, 40 merchant ships, escorted by an aircraft carrier, HMS Avenger, providing fighter cover for the first time. The convoy lost 13 ships but reached Arkhangelsk with the majority of its cargo intact. The carrier's fighters had made the difference, shooting down German bombers and forcing others to attack from higher altitude where accuracy suffered. The lesson was clear. Carriers were essential for Arctic convoy protection, but the Royal Navy had precious few carriers, and those it had were desperately needed in the Mediterranean and Pacific. The solution was improvisation, escort carriers, small carriers built on merchant ship hulls. These vessels, built in American shipyards, began arriving in late 1942. They carried 15 to 20 aircraft, mostly Grumman Martlet fighters, and could provide local air defense for convoy operations. The convoy system evolved. Designations changed from PQQP to JWRA in December 1942. Convoy sizes decreased to reduce the target concentration. Sailing schedules shifted to take advantage of polar darkness and ice conditions. Escorts increased in number and capability. Destroyers received improved radar. Corvettes got better sonar. Anti-aircraft armament across the fleet was upgraded. The Germans adapted as well. U-boats received acoustic torpedoes that homed on propeller noise. The Luftwaffe introduced the Junkers Ju-88 equipped with radar, allowing night attacks. Tirpitz remained a threat in being, forcing the Allies to maintain heavy covering forces with every convoy, even when the battleship never sortied. The statistics accumulated. Convoy JW-51B, sailing in December 1942, lost 5 ships. JW-53 lost 4. RA-52 lost 3. Each convoy was a battle. Each arrival in Murmansk or Arkhangelsk represented a victory measured in tons of cargo delivered. Each sinking represented men dead in Arctic waters, supplies lost, ships that would need replacement. The human cost extended beyond those who died. Survivors of sinkings faced ordeals that tested the limits of endurance. When the freighter Zafaran was torpedoed on November 17, 1942, her crew took to lifeboats in darkness and a gale. The water temperature was -1 degree Celsius. The air temperature -15. Spray froze on the men's clothing, turning fabric into armor that restricted movement. Rescue came after 8 hours. 30 men survived. 14 died of exposure, their bodies frozen in positions of rowing or bailing. Frostbite was endemic. Men lost fingers, toes, ears to cold injury. The Royal Navy's medical services documented thousands of cases. Severe frostbite required amputation. Less severe cases left permanent damage, reduced circulation, chronic pain, vulnerability to future cold injury. The Merchant Marine had even worse statistics because their ships lacked proper medical facilities and trained personnel. The psychological toll was equally severe. Continuous stress, sleep deprivation. The constant expectation of attack produced what modern medicine would call post-traumatic stress disorder. The Royal Navy called it battle fatigue or lack of moral fiber, diagnoses that carried stigma and offered little treatment. Men broke down, became unable to function, and were quietly transferred to shore duties or discharged. The records minimized these casualties, counting only physical wounds as combat injuries. Yet the convoys continued. Through 1943, 78 convoys sailed, carrying over 4 million tons of cargo, tanks, aircraft, fuel, ammunition, raw materials, food. The supplies sustained Soviet offensives that drove German forces back from Moscow, broke the siege of Leningrad, and began the long push westward. Stalin never acknowledged the contribution publicly. Soviet propaganda emphasized domestic production and minimized foreign aid, but the numbers told the truth. By war's end, the Western Allies had supplied the Soviet Union with 17.5 million tons of cargo, including 14,000 aircraft, 7,000 tanks, and 375,000 trucks. The Arctic route accounted for 23% of total deliveries. The Persian Gulf route carried the majority, but required 9 months from American factories to Soviet front lines. Arctic convoys, when they got through, delivered in weeks for critical items needed urgently. The northern route was irreplaceable despite its dangers. The Germans never solved the convoy problem. They sank merchant ships, killed escort crews, forced the suspension of operations during critical periods, but they could not stop the flow of supplies. Each tactical success, each convoy mauled or turned back, proved strategically insufficient. The fundamental equation favored the Allies. American industrial production vastly exceeded German capacity to sink ships. As long as enough convoys got through, Soviet resistance would continue. Tirpitz represented the German Navy's last attempt at strategic impact. In September 1943, she bombarded Spitsbergen, a minor operation that accomplished nothing. In subsequent months, British midget submarines damaged her in Kofjord, forcing months of repairs. RAF Bomber Command attacked her repeatedly with tallboy bombs, 12,000-pound earthquake bombs designed to penetrate heavy armor. On November 12, 1944, Lancasters from 617 and 9 Squadron finally hit her with 3 tallboys. She capsized and sank in Tromsø harbor. Over 1,000 men went down with her. Her destruction removed the last credible surface threat to the convoys. The final year of convoy operations, from November 1944 to May 1945, saw diminished German resistance. U-boats remained dangerous. Aircraft still attacked. But the systematic interdiction effort had collapsed. The Kriegsmarine submarine force was being destroyed in the Atlantic. The Luftwaffe's bomber squadrons were needed over Germany to defend against Allied strategic bombing. The last convoy, JW-67, arrived in Murmansk on May 12, 1945, 4 days after Germany's surrender. The crews received no recognition, no celebration, no acknowledgement that they had just completed the most dangerous sustained naval operation of the Second World War. They unloaded their cargo, turned around, and sailed home. Final statistics: 778 convoy operations, 3,000 merchant seamen killed, 18 Royal Navy warships sunk, 87 merchant ships lost, but 4 million tons of cargo delivered, sustaining Soviet resistance at its most critical moments, enabling the offensives that ground down German strength and turned the tide in the east. The Arctic convoys never received the recognition awarded to other naval campaigns. The Battle of the Atlantic overshadowed them in public memory. The Pacific War consumed more ships and men, but the strategic impact was disproportionate to the scale. Those supplies kept the Soviet Union in the war during 1941 and 42, when defeat seemed imminent. They enabled the offensives of 1943 and 44 that destroyed German army groups and reclaimed Soviet territory. They represented a commitment by Britain and America to their alliance with Stalin. However uncomfortable that alliance might be, the relationship remained fraught. Soviet authorities treated arriving convoys with suspicion and minimal gratitude. British and American seamen, who had risked everything to deliver supplies, were often denied shore leave, kept confined to port facilities, and subjected to Soviet paranoia about foreign contamination. The disconnect between sacrifice and recognition embittered veterans. Post-war, Stalin dismissed Western aid as negligible. Soviet history texts minimized or ignored the convoys entirely. The narrative of the Great Patriotic War emphasized Soviet self-sufficiency and heroism, leaving no room for acknowledgement of British and American contributions. Western veterans, already receiving minimal public recognition, found their service erased from the history of the war they had helped win. Only in recent decades have the convoys received proper historical attention. Memorials now stand in Murmansk and Arkhangelsk, honoring the Allied sailors who brought supplies through Arctic seas. Russian President Vladimir Putin, in a moment of diplomatic outreach, awarded medals to surviving convoy veterans. The recognition came 70 years late, but mattered to men who had waited a lifetime for acknowledgement. At 0300 hours on December 27, 1941, William Carter stood watch in temperatures that could kill in minutes, aboard a ship coated with ice, protecting cargo bound for an ally whose gratitude would never come. He survived that convoy and the next 6 on his 7th voyage, PQ-17. His ship was sunk by aircraft. He lasted 18 minutes in the water before hypothermia stopped his heart. His name appears on the memorial at Tower Hill in London, one among 36,000 merchant seamen who died in the Second World War. The Arctic convoys proved that ordinary men could endure extraordinary conditions when the stakes demanded it. They proved that naval power required not just ships and weapons, but the will to use them in environments that punished every mistake. They proved that strategic necessity could overcome tactical catastrophe, that losses which seemed unbearable could be sustained, and that victory often went not to the most brilliant, but to the most persistent, the most dangerous journey in the world. 3,000 men accepted that danger, voyage after voyage, knowing the odds, understanding the cost. Some came home, some did not. All deserve remembrance for a service that shaped history while receiving none of history's glory.